Well, good evening. I'm Bob Graves, and they call me the Unconventional Pastor. And tonight, I want to continue talking about something I began discussing last Wednesday, and it's probably not even going to conclude today. And I found myself very interested in the question I'm going to be discussing because during the time that I was most active as a pastor, I really didn't have a good answer to this question. And I thought it was a question that Christianity and my faith was going to answer for me. And it didn't. And so I had to find myself as a human being taking personal responsibility for myself to find an answer to this question in a manner where not that it is contrary to my Christianity or contrary to my faith, but that where the resource material was something I had to discover and learn independent of that faith. And the question I want to discuss is not always asked as a nice question either. Here's the way you usually hear it: just who do you think you are? And the truth is, we all have some sense of who it is we think we are. But who is that person? Who is it that you think you are? And is that really who you are? And I found that my own experience as a Christian was not doing a really good job of answering that. And so last Wednesday, I began, at least the first part of this, where I began talking about that process that we all go through that leads us to certain conclusions about ourselves. And of course, those conclusions that we reach are not necessarily fair, not necessarily honest, not necessarily even accurate. But so long as they're the answers that live deep at the root and core sense of our own personal truth, that's who you think you are, and that's the kind of a person you'll be busy being, whether that's good for you or bad for you. And so I wanted to continue talking about that even tonight. And we'll kind of do just a quick review of what we did discuss Wednesday. I talked about how we grow up and we have just a myriad of sensory perceptions that are coming at us. That reality is this huge thing that is unmanageable. It's so large that we immediately find ourselves having to reduce the reality that we're aware of. And I said that we're not actually aware of reality. We have a perspective into it. Our eyes look into the visual spectrum, but only from a certain wavelength to another wavelength. Our ears only pick up the periodic variations of atmospheric pressure from a certain frequency at the bottom end to a certain frequency at the top end. And we can only hear sounds that are within a certain decibel range. And beyond that range, we can do damage to our hearing. And so basically, I'm saying that as an organism, as a human being, we only have a limited set of views into the reality that we live in. And we, from these, are trying to make sense of the reality of the experience, the world, the universe, and that this is already dealing with a subset of the information that is really there, just the information our bodies are capable of receiving, and only to the degree we are able to organize it and make sense of it. And so, my basic argument there was that our understanding of reality, as well as our understanding of ourselves, is already a summary understanding, not an actual direct understanding. And that's sort of good news because this means that there's room for us to find a lack of credibility in what we think. I didn't mention this Wednesday, but it is amazing to me how I've discovered that if you meet a person who feels really good about themselves, is comfortable with who they are, and seems to be healthy and well adjusted, they're not really all that certain that they know exactly who they are. They don't feel the need to be that exact and that precise. They're just enjoying being who they are and responding to the circumstances and situations they find themselves in, and they're doing adequately well, and that's good enough. And yet, when you talk to a person who has low self-esteem, doesn't like themselves, feels like a failure or a loser, or is uncomfortable receiving compliments because they just don't feel worthy, and they feel like really they're not really that good of a person, or that valuable of a person, or that important, or that meaningful or significant. It is amazing how when you're talking to people who have this negative view of themselves, how absolutely rock solid certain they are, to the point of almost arrogance, that they know who they are. And to try to loosen them from this view of themselves is like, trying to pry glue out of a hole that's really bonded to. It's just very difficult. So it's kind of strange that people who don't feel very good about themselves seem to have an inappropriately high view of the accuracy of their opinion about themselves. Anyway, um, so we talked about this fact that we all live in a reduction and a representative conceptual construct, where one of the first things that we begin to learn as children is the concept of causation, that things are happening and something seems to be causing them to happen. And we become aware of three possible causations that all human beings early on reduce causations to one of these three areas. And it's not the only areas of causation, but it's where we as human beings get started. We recognize that some causes are internal. That is, some things happen because I made them happen. Some causes are external. That is, they happen because something outside of myself made them happen. And there are also things that happened for causes I can't identify. I don't know if I did it or somebody else did it, or what actually caused it. Now, the truth is, most things that happen are a combination of these three things that is always very different and extremely dynamic. But we tend to settle on these explicitly and discreetly as a matter of perception. It makes it easier for us to organize this as we each come to an area of causation. Now, this is important because eventually we're going to form a sense of who we are. And who it is we think we are is going to be very much built upon our understanding of cause. It's a significant part of how we're going to tell the story, spin the story, make sense of the story, and discover who we think we are. And if we are inappropriately out of balance with our sense of causation, this can lead to various different problems and difficulties. For example, the person who has an internal, almost exclusive internal sense of causality, this is going to be a person who feels like they ought to be king of their dominion, in control of everything. When things happen, they feel they're the ones that made it happen. If this person is particularly competent in some ways, they can have some delusions of arrogant grandeur. They can feel like the credit that ought to go to other people doesn't go to them. They receive it all. They really have this overly internal sense of being in control of their lives and the things that are happening. Then there's some people who are too strong in the way they settle in on some sort of external. They kind of view themselves as victims in life, that the things that they go through is just a few ineffective things they can do. Most of what's happening around them is happening to them, not by them. And these people can become overly disengaged, very discouraged, and what have you. And then there's some people who settle too deeply into this unknown. And these people are very difficult to work with because they don't see it doing anything makes a difference, whether you do it or they do it or anything. And life is just the way it is. It's in the cards. It's coming down. It's just who knows. And these people rarely prepare properly for anything, and they don't have anybody to blame either. And as a result, they don't really expect anybody else to take responsibility for what's going on, and they won't take any responsibility themselves. So these concepts of causality can dominate in our own personal attitudes in a way that actually dominates our personality into a distortion. And so, but it's something that every child learns at a very young age, so young that you don't even have the words to describe it the way I'm describing it now. It's just that you become aware of causality. And we all have a tendency to then have a favorite causality that is our default causality until we learn better. And very few people develop a multi-axial recognition that there is a cause, and that cause is probably spread apart around by things that I'm involved in and that I'm causing, and things that are being caused by others who have voluntary free choices that they're making, and things that I can't control, or I have no idea what the source is. Uh, Few people develop a more sophisticated sense of causality as a default. Um, Usually that comes it comes back to most people only after a certain amount of maturity. The brain wants to organize everything and make sense of everything and understand that everything is there because something put it there somehow, and that it either happened by chance or by determination, either by myself or somebody else or some combination of it. But the whole thing, the part of that is that even cognitively, developmentally, as human beings, this is part of what gives rise to our curiosity, our imagination, our ability to discover, our desire to discover, the knowledge that we gain, the experiences that we consider significant, and our conditional confidence in cause and effect becomes aware of the fact that life is something I might be able to navigate, and it's navigatable. And so this is part of what happens early on in life. And usually for the child, this is not necessarily a crisis. It's just an observation. But very soon in our lives, as we are developing a sense of ourself, and by the way, if you're following along with what I'm telling you, that the way we come to understand ourselves is not at all different from the way we come to understand anything. I got a capo here. I use this on my guitar. What is a capo? Well, the cognitive processes that I went through to come to an understanding of just what a capo is and how it's used and all that is really not all that different from the way I came to understand myself in terms of some of the rudimentary principles of cognitive dynamics. It's pretty much the same. But we all come to a point in our lives where we start to acquire language. And what language is it's a system of signifiers whereby certain sounds are used as labels, labels that are a reference to something other than the label itself. So that language is an amazing thing when you think about it, that it is a way of symbolizing, it is a way of signifying things other than the language itself. But we also have symbols and signifiers that actually talk about the language. I mean, for example, we use words like noun, verb. We use like present tense, past tense. We have these phrases and these sounds that actually talk about language itself. But the thing to recognize about that is this: labels, signifiers, placeholders, language is a way of summarizing a concept, summarizing a thing into a concept that I can then manage in communication. And it is therefore, in another sense, another reduction. I think you're getting the idea that I'm talking about, that by the time we're finally dealing with reality and talking about reality and experiencing reality, it has gone through multiple levels of reduction so that we are not really dealing with reality. We're dealing with perception, we're dealing with concepts, we're dealing with things that give us reality itself is multiple layers above and beyond what we're actually dealing with. And I'm trying to present this as good news because we want our self-concept to be representative of an honest, a fair, and a gracious and lovely sense of reality. And yet we realize that reality is something we're all in the process of discovering. And okay, I got a little comment here. Let me just make sure I'm reading it. Okay. Very good. Will do. Let me keep my clock up too. Now, therefore, I'm saying and I'm arguing that the human being cannot cope in a world at all without using labels, without using signifiers and placeholders. It's the only way we can relate to other things. Reality is too huge. And so therefore, all as much as we find that labels are oftentimes abusive and used incorrectly. The correction, the proper response to that is to stop abusing labels, but to just use them for what they are. You can't live without labels. You can't. It's not possible. You can live in a way where you think doesn't involve labels, but you can't live without them. It's just a part of the way human beings make sense of themselves and the world around. It's how we make sense of each other. We use labels. We're just either aware of it or not. And so it's important that we recognize, however, that those labels are a reference to a summary that may or may not be accurate, useful, or whatever. But it at least enables us to think about things, talk about things, discuss things, and deal with things, make decisions, take actions, et cetera, et cetera. I did talk about that as we're growing up, we come out with three observations that we tend to make that are the first three kinds of observations that all human beings make. First is just general observations, as you just notice things and you see something for the very first time, and then you tend to notice it time and time and time and time again. Just general observations. This is a significant part of human experience. And these general observations and the way that you make general observations becomes a big building block into who it is you eventually come to think of yourself as being. We also make observations about the way things endure the process of change, before, during, and after change. Sometimes we watch something go through change itself. Sometimes we see something go through a process where things around it are changing, and yet that thing does or does not change. But anyway, all the different combinations and permutations of change also become something we start to make observations of. And we've seen ourselves go through a variety of things where things around us are changing. And as we make certain of these observations, they will become the building blocks of part of how it is we come to think of who it is we are, based on what we've observed about ourselves in the process of many of those different changes. And then the last thing that I talked about, general observations that we make as human beings, is we observe a lot of other people. We watch how they relate to things and how they relate to us, or how they relate to other things that we think are significant to us, even if they aren't aware of it. And so as a result, we learn to observe what other human beings think of as significant, and we take that into consideration as we make those observations. Your concept of self, no matter who you are, is always tied not to reality, but to your organized and disorganized perception. So that means we need to deal with the veracity and the credibility of that perception to determine whether or not we're being honest or fair or kind. And this is true not just only of what you think of yourself, what you think of other people too. It's based on that organized and disorganized perception. Your concept of self is always attached, by the way, not to actual causes, but to the causes and explanations you attributed to them as you sought to make sense of things. So even though causality is a big part of our human attempt to make sense of the world, the causalities that we rely on are not the actual causalities, but the causalities we perceive to be the causalities. And so therefore, that's going to be a big part of how you come to understand yourself. What you find significant in general observations tells you who you are. What stands out as significant during the processes of change tells you who you are. Things that stand out in other people, that stand out to you as significant, is a part of what tells you who you are, by the very fact that those things stand out as significant. Now, your memory of these events in your life where these observations occurred are what I call meaningful metaphors. There are many, and they become metaphors because the memory of those events, even if they're not prominent in your actual recollection, are the building blocks that your brain uses to explain to yourself who you are. Even if it's no longer, totally conscious, it may be preconscious or subconscious, whatever. But your memory of these events, your history as it stands out to you, and your entire history doesn't stand out to you. There's certain events in your life that stand out more significantly than others. These become for you meaningful metaphors. They tell a story that explains who you are so that you know how to relate to yourself. And there are so many memories you've accumulated that you can't manage them all. And so it actually became necessary to get selective. Yeah. That is, you learned in life very early on how to reject certain memories as being insignificant and therefore is not going to become a part of who it is you think you are. And there's other events that you've gone through that you will consider as significant. And that's not always a good choice. In fact, it's amazing how sometimes you can have certain children who might be actually surrounded by people who praise them, who point out to them their abilities and their adequacy to things, but the child isn't listening. But when somebody points out something critical, a particular child might be extremely sensitive. Well, that's me, when you say, "Oh, you sang that so well." "Oh, I'm just trying to be nice to me," and so it's amazing how sometimes we latch on to some of these events and dismiss others, but we can't hold on to them all. And so we have to come up with a method of selecting them. That means that the things you remember about your past isn't really your past. It's just a selected set of things that happened in your past. And I know one time I was going through some therapy and coming through some changes of who was. This actually caused me to experience certain memories from my own childhood that I'd forgotten about because at the time they didn't resonate with who it was I thought I was. And although they're now resonating with who it is I now believe myself to be. And so those memories kind of it reemerged as significant, whereas in the past they were just kind of dismissed. This can happen, but we get selective about our memories, and you naturally just start to give more attention to certain memories because you can't manage them all. And these metaphoric memories serve you as proof of your general beliefs about yourself. Now, I think we need to talk a little bit about memory. I don't want to disappoint you, but human memory, is not a reliable dynamic. It really isn't. Studies show that we are far more interested in stabilizing the meaning of an event than we are in stabilizing the event itself in terms of its details. Memories are powerful, and without regard to their fairness or accuracy, they really have an extremely dominating, controlling influence upon us. And none of us have ironclad memories. Our memories evolve and change. This has been demonstrated. Individuals, first of all, observe events very differently just to begin with, let alone the way they remember them. But as time goes on, all of us rewrite history. We do. We don't mean to, we're not aware of it, but we do. And we do this partly as social animals, and we do this partly in an attempt to cope and deal with life. And as social animals, we take our memories and we create, if we have to, various differences in order to make ourselves different from certain groups of people. And we create similarities in order to be able to align with other people. And we do this for social purposes. If you know me, I'm a huge Beatles fan. And so I hang out with a lot of friends who love the Beatles too. And who knows how much of this similarity is something that we've kind of contrived for social purposes, and so we've kind of in our dealing with the Beatles and the Beatles music and the songs, we've all come to kind of a similar position on them or a similar appreciation of them for the purposes of really becoming similar to each other without realizing it. And this is something that also happens to our memories, the way we remember things. We create necessary differences with concepts of self that we want to distance ourselves from. And we come up with, over time, artificial similarities to things we do want to identify and resonate with as we think is accurate descriptions of ourselves. And this is something that we do. And a lot of people would be troubled or bothered if you were to tell them, your memories of your childhood, your memories of yesterday, your memories of the day before, your memories of things that happened in the past are not entirely accurate. And you really can't deal with all of them as entirely credibly as you might like to. All memories evolve. And the most current version of your memory of the past is actually one that most generally reflects your current beliefs about what you think to be true. You have a hard time holding on to memories that might lead you to conclusions other than those you already hold to strongly. We tend to forget details that don't fit neatly into our reality. Sometimes we experience things that are ambiguous, but we won't remember them as ambiguous. We'll remember them unambiguously as a way that fits neatly into our belief system. And we tend to remember, as I said before, the significance of the emotional impact of an event rather than the actual event itself. I remember one time, and the only way I can really accurately claim this is because I actually had a recording of a conversation I had with a person where we were disagreeing with each other. And in that recording, we both took a different position on an issue. Many years later, that person remembered that very difficult conversation. However, this was like 20 years later. Their memory was that we had a very difficult conversation and a difference of opinion. In the meantime, they had actually changed their opinion to actually match mine. But their memory of that argument that we had was that I argued their previous position and not the one that they currently have. Because the emotional impact of that was that I was disagreeing with them and they had actually altered their memory of the event to not realize that in the process of 20 years, they'd actually changed their mind about what they understood. And it wasn't until I actually had a recording of that conversation that I was able to demonstrate to myself, I never took it to that person, that this was an interesting example to me of how a person's memory of that event remembered the fact that we had a difference of opinion, remembered the fact that we took opposite sides, but didn't remember exactly what side we were on at the time. And to me, that was a very interesting experience of discovering in my own history a sense of how those memories worked. And how accurate they really are and are not, and the fact that we have a preference for the significance we assign to them more so than the actual details. Now, something about the memories and the most significant memories of yourself that stand out would be something along these lines. If you were to write out your most significant memories where you made general observations about yourself as they stood out to you, and draw attention in your story that you tell about these memories and these events of what you saw in yourself as the outcome of certain changes in circumstance. And then also recalled in the story that you're telling things that others said or did that had an impact on you. Your story and the way that you tell it would actually be a clear summary of who you really think you are. Those selected memories that stand out to you the most about your own personal history, those are the memories that tell your story that you're telling to yourself and who it is you think you are. So obviously, we want to know if we're telling ourselves a workable story, a good story, a culpable story, or a totally inaccurate and fabricated story. It's helpful to know what that story really is so that we can make the kinds of decisions and live in life the way that makes most sense to do it in a way that is going to actually work. Now, it's important for me to point this out. Those events that you remember, they didn't actually turn you into who you are. They didn't. You're not shaped by the events that you experience. Now, that goes contrary to a lot of wisdom. I'm going to argue that you are not shaped by what you go through. You are shaped by what you think those events say about you as you go through them. And that has a far more significant impact upon who it is you think you are than the actual events themselves. And this is something important to recognize, that you need to recognize that although certain events may have been the precipitating cause of how it is you come to view yourself, the actual material that you use to understand who it is you think you are has more to do with what you thought those events said about you. If you go through life thinking that that you're the loser, and you find yourself in conflict with others, you might point out to yourself, I just don't seem to be able to get along with other people. Other people don't like me. They disagree with me all the time. Or if you had a very different sense of what you thought that said about yourself, boy, I'm surrounded by a bunch of idiots, a bunch of jerks. These people can't think for themselves. I feel pretty good about the way I'm thinking. So you can see how a person can go through the same event, but because they think it says something different about them, it can have a completely different impact on their sense of self. And of course, their sense of self is already involved in the perception of the event itself. So it becomes compounding and cyclical. And usually it takes some sort of unusual event to turn it and push it into a totally different direction, which can happen, but it happens slowly. So those events didn't turn you into who you are, but rather your interpretation of those events at the time you went through them and what you thought it was saying about you and whether or not it would stand out as a memory is yet to be determined. But the impact of that event there's more of an impact on you based on how you interpreted the event than what the event actually was. Now, some memorable moments involving you will stand out to you more than others, and they rise to the top in your sense of significance and the story you tell about yourself. Because when you think about those particular memories and what you think they say about you, there's some memories where you can look at those memories and go, I don't know what that's about. And other memories, when you think about things you've been through, you can look at it and you go, you know what? That is me. And those events where that is what you can say, where it resonates with you, that this is somehow thematically consistent with you, those are the events and the way that you interpret them that has a huge impact on who it is you think you are. And that's very important to understand. By understanding this, this will help you to deconstruct some of that when it comes time to do so. Because I guarantee you, if you're like me, if you're like anybody else, there's some junk, some garbage, some baggage you acquire in the meantime where you weren't really your best friend and you weren't really honest with yourself and you weren't really honest with the reality. You were more dogging on yourself the way other people did or taking your role in life that seemed safe or whatever. But it wasn't necessarily the kind of thinking that was going to serve you well and help you to become the person you really can be. Now, you don't choose those memories at random or because, well, that looks like a good choice. I think I'll choose that memory. These are memories that you choose that rise to the top of significance because of the way that you experience them as resonatingly so. They feel authentic. Doesn't mean they are, but they feel authentic. And the very fact that a moment for you feels authentic should make you rise your eyebrows to really inspect them to determine whether or not this is just the same old story, or if you're really selling yourself a bill of goods. They were chosen because they unfolded with a way that resonated as authentic in your gut. Now, those memories that you have where you can resonate with them, these will define you. They will define you in ways you don't even understand until some different memorable moment, either from the past or from some current event, comes along that seems to do an even better job. And that could be both a negative or a positive thing. However, you've got to be honest about the fact that your observations, the general ones, the observations about yourself and change, the observations about yourself that you make in respect to how other people relate to you or the things they say and do, they are to a very certain degree inaccurate, unfair, misunderstood, improperly perceived, rewritten history, premature, or all sorts of other reasons why they could be fallacious and not at all credible or proper or useful. Now, some of your memorable metaphors are based on altered memories that define you now based on a false version of your history. Some of those memories that define you are memories that are events that we couldn't even really corroborate because they didn't really happen the way you perceived them or the way you thought they went down. And they didn't originally happen that way. Now, here's a significant detail. Although you carry around an unknown number of such defining memories, most of them are really kind of the same old story. If every time something negative happens to you, you go, well, that's me. Well, that's me. The truth is, although you may have, 100 different memories of certain events like that, the truth is you don't hang on to all of them. You hang on to the ones that most resonate within you. So although you carry, say, an unknown number of defining memories, the major bulk of what you actually believe to be true about yourself probably exists fully contained in no more than the most influential 2 dozen of such memories. All the other remaining memorable moments are merely reinforcing duplicates of your conclusions about yourself. What I'm basically saying is this: the way the human brain operates, the way we cope and deal with reality, the way we organize it, that the person you think you are is really in some ways resting fully contained, well, in everything that went on in your life, but it can be found most significantly in close to just 2 dozen significant memories from your past. This means that to uncover who it is you really think you are, doesn't mean you have to review everything in your life. You don't have to rethink everything. I don't have time to do that. Do you? Um, this means that you tend to stick to some consistent themes, and the reason why some of those memories stand out as being the most influential is because you might have a memory that says 1 or 2 things about you, but there might be sometimes an event that when it happens, there's like 5,000 different things that memory seems to tell you about yourself that you feel are just all totally coherent and consistent. And so that memory of that particular event will really stand out to you because it carries with it a huge impact. And as a result, the brain tends to store those particular events and incidents as being in a significant self-defining moment. It's a metaphor in your brain. The fact that this is now reducible to, say, 2 dozen of the most significant memories means that it really wouldn't be all that hard for you to go back and try to uncover some of the more significant memories and try to begin to recognize the story you're telling yourself based on those memories about who it is you really are, what your role is in life, what your abilities are or are not, whether or not you're important, significant, lovable, or whatever. So, although who you think you are has been slowly developing and evolving through every moment of your history, the major bulk of who you decided you are has been made to rest within the metaphors of meaning you find in the memory of little more than 2 dozen specific moments in your life. That's radical. And the reason why that's true is because of the nature of what we are as human beings and the fact that we can't manage an infinite amount of information. We have to prioritize, we have to organize, we have to conceptualize. And in the process of doing that, we've had to reduce it all to those things which can be quickly comprehended, quickly summarized, and quickly brought to the forefront. Now, to know who it is you think you are requires merely identifying some of those more major events in your life. To change who you think you are simply involves coming up to a different, challenging, and authentic review of those particular memories. And all of those other duplicating and copying events in your life will then automatically begin to take on a different significance. Now, this can take time. It can take years for that to work out. But once you have really attacked the most significant memories in your life and what it is you think they say about you and re-examined them, you will find that this will bring you to a very different sense of who you are. Now, I actually spent some time sitting in my favorite uncle's chair. He had passed away, and I inherited his chair. And I really wanted his chair. It was a place where he sat and thought. And he had an influence on me. And I would sit in that chair and I'd think. And one of the things I'd do, I'd sit back, and it was a lazy boy chair. Good for me, I guess. I would sit in that chair. And I would go back to some of the more significant and painful moments of my childhood. And I would pretend that the adult me was going back there as a witness to the event. And I would watch the event as it happened to me. And then I would later, in my mind's eye, go back to the little me and have a private interview. I would go to this tree in my mind's eye that was on this pathway, and I'd pretend I'd find myself, my younger self there, maybe crying or in pain and worried or frustrated or full of anxiety. And I'd sit down. The adult me would sit down next to the smaller me and listen to the smaller me talk about what happened. And I'd talk to that younger person and I'd say, well, don't you think that these people were really, suffering themselves, that they weren't really putting you down? Besides, you're only this old, or what should you be able to do? And I basically, as the adult, help the little child in me come to a different understanding of what that event actually says about me, what it actually says about other people, in a way that tried to spread as much love and empathy all the way around to everybody concerned. And I found that as I did this more and more and more, many of those significant events in my past that defined me started taking on an entirely new definition. And a different me began to emerge, a far less anxious, a far more confident, a far more capable person was growing out of this very naturally by taking and attacking these significant events that had happened in my life that I thought said something about me, and to re-examine them to realize, what does a 7-year-old kid know about how to properly evaluate what a situation they're going through really says about them? They have too few skills. But the older me could go back and kind of guide the younger me and kind of rework those events until I came to a very different understanding of them and came to a more honest, more mature, more useful, more meaningful, more realistic understanding of what those events really do and don't say about me. So this is really good news. By going back through some of these, you can challenge, make changes to who it is you think you are. Now, that's about as far as we can take that this time, and I hope you found this helpful. And we'll continue on this topic even coming up on Wednesday. But the basic idea here is this: just who do you think you are? The person that you think you are, whatever it is those conclusions are going to have a powerfully dominating impact on your experience of life, what you can and can't do, what you will allow yourself to do, the way you will protect your boundaries or not protect them, the way you will launch out in areas that would be good to go in, or your lack of ability to do that, or your comfort in doing it, the way that you can deal with other people, the kinds of things you can do, the kind of money you can make, or whatever, that the way that you perceive yourself is a product of a process that you can actually re-examine in a manner that only requires everything you already have inside of you to just think about, review, be honest with, and sometimes maybe some help from some other people helping you rethinking some of those issues. That can help you. Anyhow, when we continue on Wednesday, I'm going to talk to you about when you start making some of these radical changes in who it is you think you are. You're going to find that you're going to run into some resistance from other people as it begins changing the rules in the way you react and interact with others. So we'll continue that coming up on Wednesday. In the meantime, very few viewer comments coming in. I'm hoping that's a sign that maybe you're spellbound and taking it in. But if not, I do want to encourage you to participate, to send in your questions, maybe your remarks and things like that, and we'll deal with those. In the meantime, that's pretty much all I can cover today. And we're going to close a little bit early because we have a lot of preparation to do for the show that's coming up. We got a number of guests coming in, and I'll be a part of that show as well. And so we'll see you in about 15 minutes with Dr. Jones and several of the other people. I'll let Joey tell you a little bit more about that. And until then, this is Bob Greaves, the Unconventional Pastor, and I'll see you just between you and I on Wednesday. You take care. Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Bob Greaves, the Unconventional Pastor. I'll tell you something else that's unconventional. That's this studio. It's going crazy. In just a few moments here up on the stage, we're going to have Eric Hovind. We're going to have Cy. Come here, sir. Tim Bergen. All right. Thank you. I love you. I love it. Thank you for your patience. So we're going to have lots of people up here. These two guys are theists. They're going to be passionately making their position known. We're going to have David Silverman, president of the American Atheists, on Skype with us, along with Greg Bray. The Unconventional Pastor is going to be back with us. And boy, if you don't join us, you're going to be missing out. So stay tuned.